destroy people.
I must have got kicked off.
What? Oh, are we still there?
Yep.
We don't know if anybody's there.
Yeah, oh yeah, there.
Oh, you're all there.
Yeah. Yep. Everybody's good.
Okay,
We're
no
all
question.
here.
Oh, okay. I should just keep talking. You're all happy?
Keep
No
going.
questions?
Happy.
Okay. Let's do number 7. The Talmud, which is a book of Jewish law, which is based on case law from the Jewish community in the days of the Babylonians and post-Roman world. There's a portion of the Talmud, a book called Pirkei Avot, which means smart guy stuff from my ancestors. And one of the smart guys said the following: if you want God to do your will, then make God's will your will. That way, God will do your will. And I remember saying, why? If I want God to do what I want, stop wanting what I want. Yeah? Well, that's no fun. Of course, I want God to do what I want, and I don't want to stop wanting what I want. I want what I want. And the Talmud makes it clear that that's not going to happen. Stop asking God to do what you want. Dear God, please let me have 3 arms. You know, it would help, because 2 is not enough. You know how much more I could eat if I had a 3rd? I could, do cleanup while I'm doing that. I can have a 3rd. It would be very nice to have a 3rd arm. And if I pray to God all the time, dear God, please give me a 3rd arm, it's not going to happen. And I'm just going to get upset. And what's worse is I may stop appreciating the fact that I got 2 arms that work. I was born with 2 arms. That's God's will. I got 2 arms that work. I should appreciate these 2 arms. If I keep asking for a 3rd one, I will not appreciate the 2 that I have. So stop making up things for God to do and telling God to do this to make me happy. It won't happen. All that will happen is reality. It is scientific reality. That is God's will. If I appreciate it, I'll be happy. If I don't appreciate it, I will not be happy. But God will not change reality to make me happy. Remember, I told you, we had this discussion before. I want to live forever. I don't want to die. Now, is there anyone who believes that that is possibility? Is there anyone who really believes that that is reality? The fact is, I am going to die. If I take care of myself a little more, lose a little weight, who knows? I may make it another 15 or 20 years. I doubt it, but I could. That's a possibility that's real. But if I say, God, I want to live forever and not die, who am I kidding? That's not real. That's not God's will. And it is not that God woke up one day and said, Eric, I hate you, so one day you're going to die, Zappo. That's not the way it works. But the fact is, I am going to die. Now, what makes things nice is that I'm one of the few animals that understands this. I'm one of the few animals that understands that I have children. I don't have grandchildren, but my friends and my relatives do. And I like their children, my children, and these grandchildren. I like them. But I know that means I'm going to die because they're born and they grow, and that's the way it works. One generation comes and one generation goes. That is the reality of life. If I am unhappy about this, then I will have wasted a great deal of effort because it won't change. The only way I can be happy about this is if I realize that I understand this, and maybe the good thing is that I will enjoy teaching the young and the next generation and sharing them and watching them grow. But I am going to die. That's inescapable. This is God's will. This is God's plan. If I want to change reality, I will not be happy. If I wish to be happy and have God do what I want, then I better realize that I'd better get in touch with God and not the other way around. For God is not going to make me happy. I'd better get happy with reality. Therefore, if I want God to do my will, I got to do what God wants. And then God will let me do my will because I can't win. But you see, the question is, I do win. Having two arms that work means I win. Wanting a third arm is stupid. Wanting to live forever is stupid. It doesn't work. Appreciating the people I live with while they're alive, that I can have. That's God's will. So, ladies and gentlemen, to recapitulate, prayers don't change things, prayers change people, and people change things. The reality of prayer is not to make God do what I want. It doesn't happen. There is no supernatural. We Jews have understood this forever. In our Torah, we're talking about King Ahab and Elijah. We're talking about the year 800 BCE. And that story, God says it to Elijah. Yeah, you like the story about Mount Carmel with the supernatural. That's a great story, ain't it? You like that, kiddo. That's not reality. The reality is the next chapter, where God says, go do it yourself. That's reality. Sometimes the bad guys win. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. The question is, what do you do with reality? So, we Jews have understood this for thousands of years. Again, this is how Jews view prayer. In the idea of trying to figure out how Jews view the world, it's very funny how we Jews kind of take prayer and turn it upside down. Stop asking for God to do the supernatural. It's not going to happen. So, I got 15 minutes left. Any questions about anything in the whole wide world? Because I know all the answers.
Who's going to win the Super Bowl?
One of the teams.
No, I do have a question. It's like, I mean, I was raised Catholic, so I know next to nothing about the Bible. But my my impression is that maybe in the Old Testament, they prophesized that, Messiah was going to come, going to do great things, whatever. Yes. How do Jews view Jesus is the question. It's like, a lot of people back then said, "Oh, he's the one," and apparently the Jews didn't agree with that, and most of them. So, oh, and are you still looking for the guy to show up? Somebody.
The reality is that we don't believe in the supernatural. So therefore, our leaders are human beings, fallible, and we don't idealize them. We talk about them as real people, not as supernatural. We do have a firm belief that all of our kings and all of our leaders have to be moral, have to be good exemplars. In fact, you've asked me to speak at your service on May 1st about courage. And I'll be doing a service for you guys on May 1st about courage. And I'm going to talk about King David and the prophet Nathan standing up to the king. Because the king wasn't perfect. The king was not supernatural. In fact, he was pretty selfish and rotten. And courage was speaking truth to power. We do not see any of our kings or our prophets as perfect heroes. In the days of the Romans, we were looking for a king to rise up and reinstitute the monarchy and follow God's laws. Some people suggested that this was Jesus, but the Romans grabbed him and killed him. They crucified him, which is a Roman torture for sedition. And when they crucified Jesus, most of our people said, "Damn, they got another one of our boys." He was a nice guy, but they killed him. And we do not believe that he came back to life. We do not believe that he did anything supernatural. And so we don't worship him. We don't worship anybody. So that we're not looking for a Messiah. In Hebrew, the word Mashiach is just a synonym for king. Mashiach means anointed with oil. So that when the king of Israel at that point didn't wear a crown. What he did, they dripped holy oil on his forehead, kind of like oil of Olay, very fancy, expensive stuff. They dripped it on his head. That was a symbol that he was king. So in Hebrew, the synonym for the word king is Mashiach, which means anointed with oil. So that, like in England, when they talk about the crowned head of England, they're really talking about the king. They're not just talking about his head. So we did not see Mashiach as supernatural. We saw Mashiach as king. And when Jesus was crucified by the Romans for sedition against Rome, which was a horrible torture, the Romans crucified lots of rabbis. Our feeling was, sorry, they got one of our people, but he's, not supernatural, or we don't believe in a Messiah. We hoped there would be another king. There was 100 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, there was another Mashiach. His name was Shimon Bar Kokhba. He was the last king of Israel. He tried to unite the people against Rome, and he led a revolution against the Romans. It was successful for 3.5 years. And then the Romans came back and they brought in 10 legions and they slaughtered everybody in the land of Israel. And denuded Israel of Jews. The only Jews left were those in Babylonia or Egypt or in Rome. All the Jews in Israel itself were pretty much put to the sword in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. So that we have since the year 135 of the Common Era, not use the word Mashiach to refer to king at all, because it didn't work out too well. So we stopped talking about Jesus. We don't talk about anybody named Mashiach. As Christianity gained in popularity, in the Middle Ages, some Jews started talking about Messiah. And again, people who are fundamentalist Jews, a lot of Hasidim, who I find them very strange Jews, but they believe there's going to be a Messiah. And my response is, when he comes, you call me. Till then, I don't believe it. You know, if Jesus comes back from the dead, I'm waiting. Nice to see him. We can speak Aramaic. We'll have a good time. But, you know, I have nothing. We certainly have nothing against Jesus. He was a great man, a good Jew, and he tried hard. Romans killed him. Same thing with Shimon Bar Kokhba, who was the last Mashiach. I think he was a good boy, tried hard, died fighting the Romans. Unfortunately, got us all killed. Didn't work out too well. So, yeah, we look upon Catholicism as kind of a Greco-Roman takeoff on Judaism. The Protestant Reformation was really a big change in saying Jesus was a human being. Don't forget that the church talked about Jesus as a semi-divine being. He was God incarnate. And Jews look at that and say, no, that's not possible. And so we just thought the whole thing was kind of crazy. The Protestant Reformation was much more of a, let's talk about Jesus as a human being. And again, we have nothing to say negative about Jesus. Everything he wanted and did. He was a good rabbi, and sorry the Romans killed him, but we don't worship him. So, and we don't see in our Bible, Jesus is not even there. It's all done before Jesus. Remember, the Torah was a written document by 450 BCE. The prophets, the Torah, the T in Tanakh, the Torah is a written document 450 BCE. The prophets lived between 900 BCE and 450 BCE. And so all the prophets, their books are written in those 400 or 500 years. There are other books called writings, which are pretty much finished by the time of Jesus. So that as far as the Jews are concerned, our Tanakh is a finished document by the time Jesus is born.
When was the Old Testament canonized?
The Old Testament was canonized. It's written down sometime around the time of Jesus. Okay, Jesus was born probably in the year 4 BC, and he was crucified probably in the year 33 or 34 of the Common Era. At that point, because Israel is oppressed by the Romans, the Old Testament is pretty much a finished canon around the year 100, which is just at the time when they start writing the New Testament. We see a lot of books written in the Middle East around that time of 100 Common Era. But the Old Testament is pretty much a finished book at that moment.
What is Midrash?
Midrash is a Hebrew word that means story sermon. story sermon. So that if you look at Jewish legal literature, Torah is a document 450 BCE. The rabbis talk about it. Now, there's floating around all the books of the prophets. There were lots of prophets. These guys are living in the time of the dual monarchies, 900, 800, 700, 600, 500, 400. And by 450, when the Torah is written down, prophecy stops. No more prophets. We know there were lots of prophets, some of whom obviously didn't work out. They wrote books, they were crazy guys, what they say didn't happen. So nobody kept the book. They threw them out. The prophets, the 21 prophets that we find are the prophets who people kept alive. You know, Isaiah wrote a book and people said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And what he preached came to be. So that book was saved, and the rabbis eventually said, oh, that's a holy book written by Isaiah. Yeah, that goes in Tanakh. As they moved into Babylonia in 586 BCE, at that point, the temple ceased to be. The Babylonians had destroyed it. And in Babylonia, some Jews went to Egypt. A lot of Jews went back to Egypt. A lot of Jews went to Babylonia. In Babylonia, they started making law about how to follow the Bible. That law was not written down, but it was case law. That's what Talmud is. That's how to be a Jew. And it got written down after several hundred years. But once we had the Torah, rabbis would talk about it and give sermons. That's what Midrash is, rabbinic sermons. And if you look at what I spoke about tonight about Elijah, you'll find a good example of one story in 1 Kings 18 where God does the supernatural and things luck out. He destroys the prophets of Baal. Very next chapter, Elijah wants it again. It's not going to happen. And rabbis would then say, well, what's the point of that story? The point of that story is stop asking God to do supernatural miracles, go do it yourself. That's the point, and that's the sermon. That story is a midrash, but of course it's in the Bible, the still small voice. It's in the writings, but that's a midrash. Midrash means a rabbinic sermon.
So it's written for a spiritual purpose rather than a historical fact. Is that what you said?
Yes.
So do you think the Gospels were written as Midrash?
Yes, it's Christian midrash. If you look at there are 4 Gospels, and they're obviously written by different people, and they change the stories a little bit, and they tell different stories. Each one is its own self-contained story. So we look at the New Testament and say, these are written by people who were followers of Jesus, who came after Jesus, and they're Christian midrash. In other words, stories to tell you to learn from Jesus in his life. And that's what we look at it. We say, you know, I mean, there's stories about Jesus that he does the right thing. He's a nice guy, he says good stuff. And we'd say, that's nice. And then there are other stories in the Gospels where they say, well, Jesus was a divine being. And we look at that and say, oh, okay, that's not so Jewish. You're getting off the track going into Greek philosophy. So we don't see, and also in the Midrash, in the Jewish Midrash, they're very contradictory. Sometimes they'll tell the story of God doing something, and a perfect example is in the Bible, in the story in Genesis where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son. And I used to go out of my way every other year. We read that story on Rosh Hashanah. And I would one year tell the story that Abraham failed the test because he was willing to offer his son on the altar of his good intentions. He was willing to offer his son up for his religious views. And then I would give the next year a sermon saying, no, Abraham passed the test because you can't see his son as a person. He's symbolic as his future, and it's a Midrash. And so Abraham passed the test because he was willing to put his future in God's hands. And people used to say, you know, Rabbi, every other year you contradict each other. And I say, well, it depends which sermon you need to hear. It's not a question of Midrash being true. It's a question of a story to teach a point. And that's what sermons are, stories to teach a point.
So I think that the Christians' fundamentalist ideas about miracles and things like that are really because the fundamental Christians do not understand that the Gospels were written as Midrash, that is for spiritual truth rather than historical truth.
I believe you're right, but that's because I'm looking at it from the outside as a Jew. You know, as I think I mentioned last time, Tertullian says, I believe it because I'm committed to believe it. And that's the, as a Jew, I would say that's the mitzvah, that's the good deed, that I believe it. And I would say that's good, but we Jews don't say that. We don't view it that way.
So the thing is, like, I'm new to this UU church, but I came from a very fundamentalist church. And I have the feeling, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I have the feeling that the UUs have rejected the fundamentalist ideas. And so a lot of what you're trying to tell us about Judaism being different than Christianity is really aimed toward fundamentalist Christians. And we've already rejected that, I think.
I think you're right. Yes, I would. That's my understanding. That the university, whatever you people, the Unitarians, that the Unitarians do have a very similar view about the Bible that the Jews do. The difference is, as I've been saying a number of times, is that Judaism is not just a religion, it's an ethnicity. So that the Bible to us, the Tanakh, is not just like Khalil Gibran and wisdom literature. We look at our Tanakh as these are our stories. So when you say to me, how about a story of speaking truth to power? I'll tell you the story of Nathan the prophet and King David, because that's my people's story. That's the one we've been using for the last 3,000 years, and we're still telling it. When you ask me about slavery, I will say, you know, I celebrate Passover. That's my story that my people have been telling for 3,000 years, and we're still telling it. And does that mean that is the only way to look at slavery? I suppose if you're not a Jew, you wouldn't tell that story. You know, I'm sure there are stories, you know, that other people tell, which are just as powerful to them. The difference is that Jews are an ethnicity. And so we look at our history and our customs, and this to us is the right way to do it. Let's talk about prayer. That to a lot of people, Sunday is the day of prayer. That's because the Christians at Nicaea in 324 of the Common Era changed the Sabbath and said, we're going to start praying on Sunday, the Lord's Day, the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And the Jews said, well, that's nice. We're still going to do it on Saturday because that's the day we always did it. Now, as I pointed out before, well, so does that mean we're right and that the Christians are wrong? No, it just means that's the day we Jews do it. It's just like my mother and I were talking about something at one point, and she was using a Hindu term, and I was using a Hebrew term. And I said to her, how come you're using the Hindu term? And she said, well, because I've been studying, this kind of stuff. And I said, that's nice, Ma, but we have a Jewish term called a mitzvah, and we've been using it for 3,000 years, and I'm still going to use it. Doesn't mean the Buddhist term is wrong. It's just the Jews are an ethnicity as well as a philosophy. And that's a big part. We talked about a yarmulke at the beginning. Jews wear a yarmulke. Do you have to? No. It's not even one of the 613 commandments. It's just one of our customs. We have a lot of ethnic customs. Look, I guess I've taken up Italian food with a great deal of gusto, and I don't have any Italian in my family. Sure do like their food. I claim a nice, good spaghetti sauce is my own. Doesn't mean I'm less Jewish, just means I'm stealing someone else's culture too. Any other questions? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Next week is the last week, and we will be talking about Israel, the people and the nation. And that's, again, something that is important to Jews, but not other people. It's funny. People have, talking about Italians, they've left Italy and come to America. And I say to my friends who tell me they're of Italian heritage, I said, well, what makes you Italian? And I said, well, it was my grandfather's home. And I said, okay, but there are Italian Protestants, and there are Italian Catholics, and Italian agnostics, and Italian Jews. So what exactly is it that makes you Italian? Well, if you speak Italian, you're Italian. Okay, I'll agree with that. But if you don't speak Italian, then you're not Italian anymore, are you? And when you become American, are you still Italian? Whereas if you're a Jew, you can be an American, but you're still a Jew. I once wrote a Purim play in which I made fun of Jewish identity, which is what you're supposed to do on Purim. And I said, when you're a Jew all the way from your first Baruch Hu till your Kaddish, they say. When you're a Jew, you got style, you got class. Okay, enough. Thank you very much. See you next week.